the not so much non-kinetic as pre-kinetic sorts of conflict that the Chinese have been engaged in for decades for a very clear purpose: taking down the United States of America. We're going to focus in on a piece of that unrestricted warfare that has been singularly successful, and that is the financial front, through which the Chinese have not only weakened our country, but enormously strengthened theirs, specifically by effecting the transfer of immense amounts of money. Estimates range from $2 trillion on the low side to perhaps as much as $5 or even $6 trillion on the high side, from mostly the pension funds, mutual funds, exchange-traded funds, indexed funds, and other investment vehicles of largely unwitting American citizens who have entrusted such funds to Wall Street fund managers, who have in turn invested enormously in communist China. As we will be discussing in the course of this program, much of that money, not all of it, but much of it, has gone into companies that, well, are of course doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party, which is bad enough, but that are actively engaged with, supporting, and otherwise enabling the largest peacetime buildup of military capability, arguably in history, namely that of the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese Communist Party's military. We have the privilege, in discussing all of this, of hearing from a man who has been really in the vanguard of the effort to not only expose what's being done to the benefit of our mortal enemy and its capacity to inflict immense destruction on, to be clear, not just our men and women in uniform or the Western Pacific, but on us here at home as well. And that would be the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. His name is Congressman John Molinar. He represents the people of Michigan in the House of Representatives and has done so with distinction for quite some time. In his capacity as chairman of this select committee, however, he has been rendering a singularly important service. The committee has arguably been the most effective and relentless monitor of what the Chinese are up to, and has been active under his leadership in not only exposing the things that are particularly ominous, but also trying to encourage corrective action. Identification of yet another Chinese company that is tied to the People's Liberation Army, working for it and aiding it in increasing its capability to do us harm. As I understand it, it has not been designated, as have many others of these Chinese companies, including notably a company that is very like Alibaba called Tencent, by the Pentagon as part of its 1260H list, as it's called, a list of Chinese military companies operating in the United States. But it is now understood to be working for and with the PLA, as it's known, in two important respects: sharing data about Americans who have been using its services, and evidently identifying through its cyber operations in the United States with those customers, presumably principally, means of attacking our cyber infrastructure. Vulnerabilities, in other words, that can be exploited by the People's Liberation Army and other aspects of the PLA's parent, the Chinese Communist Party. We had an opportunity to discuss both the Alibaba revelations and the agenda of the chairman of the Select Committee in terms of correcting this problem, of which Alibaba is just one egregious example, namely the access to our capital markets that the Chinese Communist Party has. Indeed, the unique access in the entire world, thanks to a memorandum of understanding that was engineered by then Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. The Chinese Communist companies, pursuant to a memorandum of understanding, can participate in and extract resources from American capital markets without having to abide by our various securities laws and regulations. Laws and regulations, let me just hasten to add, that are in place to protect American investors. And yet, companies working for our enemy are allowed to flout those laws, those regulations, those protections for our investors, and in the process, of course, exploit our resources in a way that no other company, no American company for sure, and no company of any other country either can do legally. So one of the things that we talked about with Congressman Molinar is addressing this most reckless access that we've granted the Chinese Communist Party, and in particular, what this memorandum of understanding allows them to do, and why all of this must be subject to corrective action. And I was very heartened, and we will.
We don't want to be in a situation where either with taxpayer dollars or with investor dollars that we're funding our demise as a nation. And when it comes to Chinese companies, we have to recognize that there's really no such thing as a private sector company in China. By law, they are required to be subservient to the Chinese Communist Party and basically carry out any activity that the Chinese Communist Party requires them to do. So in the case of Alibaba, we realize that, our Pentagon has designated them as a Chinese military company. And what we've learned is through this process, because of their national security laws, China, wherever a Chinese company or a Chinese national is throughout the world, is required to carry out the mission of the Chinese Communist Party. And that means when customer data or different information on cloud services, different vulnerabilities and cybersecurity, if those exist and Alibaba is aware of those, they are required to hand that information over to the Chinese Communist Party. So it creates a situation where you don't want Alibaba in our infrastructure in any way. We have asked SEC Chairman Atkins to consider removing companies that are on the entity list for the Pentagon that are considered Chinese military companies not to be allowed on American exchanges. And my hope is that they will move in that direction. But right now we're seeing the situation where American companies, American investors are investing in companies that are linked to the Chinese military, and those technologies could be used against our men and women in the armed forces. Also to slave labor. When you look at recently the different IPOs that have occurred, whether it was cattle with J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, and then recently a mining company which was put on the exchange and IPO by an American company, Morgan Stanley, and there's a proven track record of complicity in Xinjiang with slave labor, with human rights abuses in Colombia, and so we see these situations where American investor dollars unknowingly are either advancing the Chinese slave labor or cooperation with the Chinese military-industrial complex, and that's just wrong. But we need to make it illegal, and we need to take legislation as well as cooperation with the executive branch to shut that down.
Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, retired, one of our country's preeminent experts on the Chinese threat and particularly the military dimensions of it. He is a member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China. He is a senior fellow with the Geneva Center for Security Policy. He is also the co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer of an incredibly important book that could not be more relevant to this subject. It's entitled Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. We asked Captain Fennell in the course of our interview today to speak to what the Chinese have been doing with the money that has been hemorrhaging to them, particularly with respect to that military buildup. Let's go to the video with Captain Fennell.
The chairman's spot on. It's the details of how do you actually get the United States of America to stop paying the Chinese Communist Party to build the People's Liberation Army. My job in uniform and for the last decade has been to watch the PLA grow. And 25 years ago, they were a coastal water navy. They had very, very small air force. They had a very limited rocket force, very small short-range missiles. They had virtually no nuclear weapons or warheads and then no space capability. And in the space of 25 years, the United States of America, through Wall Street, through these deals that you spoke with the congressman about, we have basically built the largest military in the world, but it's not America's military. It's the Chinese Communist Party's military. And so now they have the largest navy on the planet, largest in terms of number of ships, largest in terms of number of anti-ship cruise missiles, largest in terms of concentrated naval power in the Western Pacific, inside the first and second island chains. So now they dominate the South China Sea to the extent that they can bully on a daily basis our treaty allies in the Republic of the Philippines, which we watched it ramp up since June of last year in 2024. We've watched them now here in the last 3 weeks go after Japan unrelentingly, and they're obviously daily over the last 4 years surrounding Taiwan on a daily basis with naval and air and space assets and unmanned drones. This is all due to the United States' posture of not really being minding our attention to detail in terms of what the impact is of these businesses. And I know that folks in Wall Street will say, well, we have a fiduciary responsibility. We have a legal responsibility to make money for our investors. And no one is questioning that. What we're questioning is your judgment in making that money on a regime that's turning the money that you're making and providing to them into a military force that is designed for one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to destroy the United States military. And so, I lived it. I was on the front lines out there in Japan and in Hawaii in terms of watching the Chinese and being on ships and around all what China was doing. And their military posture is designed to destroy the U.S. 7th Fleet, the 5th Air Force, the 7th Air Force, and to destroy the United States Marine Corps' 3rd Expeditionary Force, Marine Expeditionary Force. That's what they're designed to do. And they have built the capacity to do that. And for a long time, we denied it. The elites in Washington said, oh, there's nothing to worry about. There's no threat. They're decades away. Well, just this last week, we saw them commission their 3rd aircraft carrier that's now operationally combat ready. And it is now their 3rd aircraft carrier that they've commissioned in just 13 years. And this one is 80,000 tons, the size of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, and it also has electromagnetic aircraft launch systems, the latest technology that we have, and they seem to be performing with it very well. They were able to launch the J-35 5th-generation stealth fighter while we're still having troubles with our own USS Gerald R. Ford and its ability to launch the F-35, which is a 5th-generation fighter, so stealth fighter. So that issue aside, the fact of the matter is the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, which is the gun that the Chinese Communist Party uses to execute and implement their strategic goals, which is global domination through the global governance initiative, global security initiative, global development initiative, global civilization initiative, all formal initiatives that are implemented and being promoted through the United Nations are what is China's goal. And they will use that military force. And even if they don't actually shoot somebody, they're using it today, as I said, to bully and harass and intimidate our allies to essentially walk away from the United States and the national security interests that we have. And it's really, really irresponsible to even have this kind of a discussion with somebody. These people that run these corporations in Wall Street, in the Security Exchange Commission, these are educated people. They're very smart, but they refuse to address this fundamental issue, and the pressure needs to stay on them.
One thing that is possible, easy action that could be taken to stop our underwriting or funding our demise, as Congressman Molinar calls it, would be to end a sweetheart deal that Joe Biden engineered back in 2013 that gave the Chinese Communist Party's companies uniquely access to our capital markets without having to abide by our securities laws or regulations. How important would you say it is that we end that insanity?
It's absolutely of top priority. It's inconceivable, even if you didn't take everything that I said in the prior segment about the threat that's been raised and the modernization of their army and the military, of the Chinese military. Just the simple fact of how is it possible that a foreign government can operate in our own capital markets without showing the books? It just, what I thought we were trying to be, fair and equitable and treating people, with respect and equality. And we're not doing that. And we're letting an avowed enemy inside our markets is just insane. And I would not want to have any of my money being invested in China. And we should stop it now.
I suspect, if you're listening to this program, that you may also have money invested in China. Millions of Americans do. Again, the vast majority of them, I believe, are unaware of that fact. And I suspect that, like Captain Fennell, and I think our Committee on the Present Danger of China, which has, from its inception in 1999, had ending this financial underwriting, this funding our demise, as the chairman put it, as a top priority. If so, I want to give you just a little bit more information about how this is operating and the lengths to which Wall Street is now going, in collusion with the Chinese Communist Party, to ensure that those funds, maybe your funds, literally your funds, continue to move to Beijing. I'm going to read from an article that appeared in Reuters on November 14th, just a few days ago. Forgive me for reading it, but I think it's important that you get a sense of what's going on here. The chairman mentioned in passing that a company called Cattle, C-A-T-L. We've done several programs of this series on that company, listed by the Pentagon on that 1260H list as a company, a Chinese military company operating in the United States. They arranged, in the case of this particular transaction, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, respectively run by Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan, to use a kind of bank shot to help the Chinese raise money for that Chinese military company. Evidently feeling a little uncomfortable, perhaps as a result of what the chairman and his select committee have been doing and what our committee and others have been doing. I want to also commend the work of our friends at the Coalition for a Prosperous America in this regard. And of course, Roger Robinson, who has been very much, a leader in this space, Gordon Chang, and most especially Maria Bartiromo of Fox Business, who has been on this like the proverbial white on rice. For whatever reason, the play that is now being used by Wall Street is to help the Chinese sell IPOs, initial public offerings listed in Hong Kong, to American and other investors. And the chairman mentioned that in addition to cattle, there was recently a Chinese mining company that would be known, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, it's Z-I-J-I-N, Zijin, I guess, Gold International, a global conglomerate. As it happens, it is on a list, not the Pentagon's list, but a government list of companies that have their imports banned because of their involvement in human rights abuses, specifically slave labor. And what this report says is, quote, in September, Morgan Stanley assisted with Zijin Gold's IPO to help its parent company raise funds by selling its non-Chinese gold mining assets and listing them on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, according to the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, unquote. They go on to say that raised questions of whether it helped Zijin Mining evade U.S. prohibitions, according to the committee. What Representative Molinar said about this in a letter to Morgan Stanley's CEO, Ted Pick, was, quote, when U.S. financial institutions engage with Chinese firms linked to Uyghur forced labor, they undermine the U.S. government's goal of deterring forced labor globally. And the point is that this is being done deliberately, purposely, by these large American masters of the universe enterprises on Wall Street. And I'm very pleased to say that Chairman Molinar is seeking documents and communications about Morgan Stanley's involvement in this particular transaction, as he did in subpoenaing documents from J.P. Morgan and Bank of America in connection with their help raising, by some estimates, $5 billion for CATL, or cattle. So I simply wanted to say, first of all, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Frank. I'm just proud to be doing this with you, and thank you for your leadership and all your hard work and your dedication to defending this country, because I think that is unfortunately a rare thing today. As I'm listening to both you, but also Chairman Molinar and our good friend Jim Fennell, you're kind of left with this idea that there's almost something suicidal going on. You think, what could the calculation be on the American side for engaging with Chinese corporations this way and trying to bring them in front of U.S. investors? And all you can really think is there's some strange calculation going on that normal people wouldn't really be part of. So let me say a few things, and then, as you said, we can have a conversation. But listening to you, Frank, I was struck with the idea that we're not here with this committee to worry about investors. Just to be clear, investors can figure this stuff out for themselves. What we're worried about is the American people and whether the American Republic can be secured or not from the predations of people like, Xi Jinping and all of his allies in the Chinese Communist Party. When I look at the calculations, it goes something like this for me. Communist China is in a total war with the United States. They mean to extract from us as much knowledge and wealth as possible over as a reasonable period of time as possible. They want to do it slowly so as not to awake the American giant. They want to do it in a careful, calculated way that maximizes returns for them. They've been doing it for 30 or 40 years. It's going swimmingly. You have this chap named Donald Trump. He's a bit of an annoyance, but that too shall pass. And in the meantime, we, the Communist Party, have figured out how to use all the tech oligarchs in the United States to wrap their arms around Donald Trump and to make sure that Donald Trump believes somehow that the future of the U.S. economy is still intimately intertwined with that of Communist China. And so from their point of view, the CCP's point of view, they're managing relationships. They're managing President Trump. They're managing all the tech oligarchs, and they're trying to put President Trump in that relationship in a kind of a box. The Chinese Communist Party knows that we have exported to them much of our manufacturing base, that there's a lot of things that we would like to do but can't do because they now do it. We have a hard time building fighter aircraft. Indeed, it's impossible to produce fighter aircraft without components from Communist China. The same is true of our military ships, or our military aircraft, and our naval ships, our nuclear weapons, all of that. We need certain components from Communist China to make that a reality. We don't have that today. That, of course, is, as I suggest, a kind of suicidal calculation the American government made over many years. What we're dealing with right now is sensible Americans like all of us who are on this webinar trying to understand, how do we get out of this fix? How do we rebuild American manufacturing? How do we slow down and stop the flow of money going from the United States to Communist China? How do we awaken the American people? How do we awaken U.S. leaders? How do we support President Trump and his ambitions for America to be a manufacturing powerhouse and to do this all here in the United States? And people will often say to me, well, why isn't President Trump doing more? And I am a pretty enthusiastic defender of President Trump. And I'm always saying, look, he is trying to unwind 3 decades of malfeasance where our leaders have exported the manufacturing of the U.S. to China. President Trump's trying to bring that back. Not that easy to do. And he's trying to do it in such a way that does not cause a kinetic war that we may not be prepared to fight. So it's a very delicate balance he's engaged in today. When I look at the people on Wall Street, as I say, we're not doing this to protect the people on Wall Street. I think most of the time they could care less for the American people. They too are trying to extract the wealth of the American people and put it in their pockets. And so they see China as a way of facilitating all that. But when I look at their calculation, you can kind of see that they're thinking President Trump and this America First movement's not going to last. This is an aberration. This is a moment in time that is going to stand in history as just a short interlude in the globalist march towards, a kind of one world government, a kind of one world economy, a kind of unification of the globalist stream. And whereas President Trump would like to create manufacturing, we on Wall Street all know that's just not possible, and that over time, after he leaves, it will all just go back to what it was. And then throw on top of that, we're all going to have artificial intelligence doing much of what is done today anyway. This dream of President Trump to rebuild American manufacturing and have a kind of golden age is just a bunch of nonsense. And so we're not going to provoke him, but we're not going to cease what we've been doing with communist China. They're the future, and we are going to get as much wealth as possible from the American people and make as much money as possible on this in as low profile a way as we can get away with. That's what I think we're really dealing with here. And I think all the calculations that get made in Washington are really some variation on that. Can President Trump succeed in bringing manufacturing back to the United States? Whatever President Trump says, by the way, about working well with his communist Chinese counterparts, there's a fundamental difference here. Communist China wants to be the manufacturing base. They don't want any of that in the United States. They think that is unjust. They think a deal was made 30 years ago that they're the manufacturers and we are the consumers. If we're going to change that calculation, then all bets are off. So Communist China, they're going to do what they do, which is spend as much money as possible to influence U.S. opinion. They're successful at it. They've bought off Wall Street. They bought off much of official Washington. They are using all of that influence that they've built up over so long a period of time to engage in political warfare in the United States, information warfare in the United States. They have built alliances throughout the world to make sure that that globalist view is perpetrated, whether it's economic deals they make with their Belt and Road Initiative or the kind of resource deals they have to make with other countries like Venezuela or Saudi Arabia for them to attract energy or to get energy for their country. They think they have this figured out, and they don't think the United States is prepared to challenge that, President Trump notwithstanding. And they think over time they're just going to win here. I think for anyone watching this webinar, they really have to up their game, as it were, or help us up our game, maybe even better, so that we're able to educate the American people about these things. It's not at all clear to me that America or American conservatives, let's say, or even Republicans, share any of President Trump's ambitions when it comes to his economic golden age. That they don't see us doing the kind of things President Trump wants to do. In fact, quite often they seem to be embracing more the tech oligarchs. They seem to be embracing artificial intelligence. They seem to be indifferent about whether or not our American middle class is going to have the kind of wealth needed in the future. And so, without being at all depressing, because I myself can get depressed about all this, Frank, there needs to be a rethink at the highest levels on the political right in this country about whether we're going to actually defend this nation or not. Today, I don't really see it on the political right. I see one man in President Trump in the White House who shares this point of view with the American people. But that needs to be far more widely understood so that an orderly decoupling from communist China can actually be achieved. Because from China's view, they're in total war, they're winning, and there's going to be a world without Donald Trump someday, and they're going to be well poised to take advantage. So it's really explaining this to the American people and seeing whether or not they can understand this and then take action.
Don't these people have children? These Wall Street guys? Don't they have a stake in the future of our country? Are they truly indifferent to the kind of world that they're helping bring about if they persist in enriching and empowering and emboldening our enemy?
Yeah,
I'd ask you, Brian, what do you make of that? I mean, it may be suicidal, but it's homicidal, and among those who will be murdered if they have their way, whether they intended or not, they had their way, it will be their own loved ones, will it not?
No, that wouldn't be the case, Frank. The people on Wall Street think they're part of a Mandarin class, as are their children. They and their children are rich. Let's just be blunt about it. They're rich. They think they're above all this. They live in gated communities. I'll exaggerate this point, but they're well-to-do. They live in, nice parts of the country that are free from the kind of, crime and what have you that certain places have. But they think they're above it all. They think that the world will evolve to being a China-centric world. America will be a place where intellectual property is produced. There'll be these intricate financial relationships that they and their children will be part of that elite class, the Mandarin class, as it were, of the United States, that is capable of bridging the gap between China and the U.S., and will facilitate a kind of new world order where, they're succeeding just fine. So that's the crazy part here. Not so crazy. It's just a rational calculation. They're not patriotic, or they think this is real patriotism, making sure that America can live in a world with communist China. And where you have these retrograde, people like the Committee on the Present Danger China that sees China for what it is, an existential threat. We, the Wall Street class, see China as merely the future, and we want to make sure the United States can survive in that China-centric future.
But Brian, you're a student of history, and you know that these guys would not be the first who have assumed that if they sell out their country, they will prosper under the new order. And my sense of it is that, by and large, what happens in that circumstance is that they're among the first to be taken up against the wall and shot when the new order is established. And that's particularly true of the Chinese communists, is it not?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm being kind of provocative today because it's you and me.
It's just being ornery.
Yeah, well, no, it's they remind me of the Vichy French. America's an occupied country, and they're just going to make their accommodations. I think there are patriotic people on Wall Street, absolutely. Lest anyone think I'm a fatalist about this, I still think we're going to win. But it won't be because the people on Wall Street wake up to the fact that communist China is an existential threat. We're going to win for two reasons. One, the American people, when they finally understand these things, will want dramatic change, and they'll make sacrifices to rebuild the American economy the way it should be. They'll make sacrifices to rebuild the American military because they still want to live as free men and women. So, to cut to the end of this, movie, we win. But it's going to take a lot of sacrifice on behalf of the American people to undo the kind of economic world we find ourselves in today after 30 years of exporting our manufacturing and our know-how to communist China.
A deadly pact.
Yeah, it's a deadly pact, but, I love Lee Smith, and I think it's a great book, but I'm not sure it's quite broken. President Trump exposed it, and maybe let's just say he did break it, but the Chinese are trying to put it together.
Yeah.
And let me say too, Frank, the crazy part about the investment piece is China is a black box, as we've talked about, a dozen times on these webinars. We don't really know what's going on in communist China, and the idea that they wouldn't have to make public to an investor their audited financials is utterly insane, right, as we know. But I've been looking at recently, you and I follow this stuff carefully. I've been looking at a bunch of demographers talking about China, who are wondering, does communist China really have 1.4 billion people? Is that actually possible? And of course, if you start talking about, whether or not communist China has 1.4 billion people, you're kind of sounding like, is the earth flat? Like, of course they have 1.4 billion people. We're told ad nauseum they have 1.4 billion people. But do they? Because that 1.4 billion number, or that number over a billion, is something that Wall Street and the globalists use to suggest that the future is communist China. How many people have you and I encountered who say, look, China is the future. They have 1.4 billion people. And, they're very hardworking and industrious and what have you.
And that's a lot of toothbrushes. And we're going to sell them the toothbrushes.
Right. And somewhere down the line here, we're going to be able to sell some widget that we make to all those 1.4 billion people, toothbrushes or something else. Mm-hmm. But then you hear these demographers who say, well, look, 50 years ago, they were about 500 million people. And they would have had to have an incredibly large number of children per couple in order to have reached 1.4 billion. And some people speculate that the number is below a billion. Mm-hmm. Some people speculate the number is below 700 million. Mm-hmm. That starting data point of 500 million may have been wrong. We have no idea. Yeah. But I'm only cautioning people that because they're a black box and they use these numbers so freely, we have no idea what really is true. Because let's say they only had, for the sake of argument, 700 million people. Well, maybe the world's not so inevitable at that point. The Chinese world is not so inevitable. They have huge demographic problems.
They do.
And with those demographic problems are problems associated with the people that have been living under communism for these 50 years, which has corrupted those people. So the combination of all those things makes them not inevitable, but because they have nuclear weapons and a first-rate military, they're very dangerous. And because they have a communist ideology that looks to dominate the world, the United States must be marginalized somehow, some way. And so that's one of the reasons we do all this and talk about this way.